Okay, so hello everyone. Hope you're having a wonderful IIEX so far. It's great to see you all in person. And the topic of today's presentation is really how to use the available and scalable technologies in order to bring behavioral and biometric insights into the always-on research scene. And the case study that I chosen for this presentation is actually in fintech, because it seems to be one of the most aggressive and competitive markets, so it's a very interesting thing to observe how are things developing on that front. Okay, first a bit of intro. Essentially what we do at Tacit is we do scalable and proven technology to monitor and quantify your emotional reactions and then to connect that to what was happening on the screen. The problem is quite simple, and it's probably obvious to all of you, which is that we're not, as consumers, we're not very good at articulating what do we want to see. And there's a couple of reasons why this is so. The first one is we are not very comfortable with saying what we really feel. The second is we can't seem to find the right words, and even if we do, it's not scalable because it doesn't allow automated interventions. So really the problem is, how do we get insights that are equally accurate and actionable for the production teams and marketing teams so that they can deliver actual relevant products in real time? And the solution is quantifying both physical and physiological data in order to know how your consumers really feel in a given moment. When we talk about behavioral data and biometric data, we mean a couple of different data sets. I'll just go through some of them because you probably heard about a few, but maybe you don't know about the entire suite of them. The first one is neuro and cardio, so EEG and ECG, you'll probably know that one. The second is eye tracking, so exactly where we're looking at on the screen. And in the example, you'll see just how relevant that is in actual insights. The third one is head and body movement. So are we tilting our heads? Are we nodding for approval? Or are we nodding in a way that means a different thing for a different culture? After that, we have facial coding. We all know micro-expressions, but also, are these micro-expressions mimicking the faces that you're seeing on the screen, and are they connected in any way? And after that, we have speech sentiment analysis. So not only what are we saying, but the tone, the pitch, the sentiment of our voice, and also the unarticulate sounds that we continuously make during these processes. And then lastly, posture. Are we sitting? Are we sitting up straight? Are we leaning in? Are we walking? Are we lying on the bed? A most common position of our Gen Z participants, are we simply lying in bed or on the couch while we're doing research? And how is that connected to the response that we're having? And essentially the way we're different is, this is old technology, this is not new, and that's the good part of it. That means that it's validated and it's been heavily tested. What's new is that we're using off-the-shelf devices as affordable and as scalable as they can be. So any device, any wearable, a total of more than 50 devices that are compatible with our system. And the reason why we do this is because we want to make it scalable and easy to use. If it's not easy and simple to use for the participant, it will simply not get used to the extent that we want to. And the result of this is a platform that can support any and every behavioral and biometric experiment. So regardless if you're a pharmaceutical company or if you're a fintech, if you're testing really serious longitudinal studies, or if you just want to test your early stage creatives, the purpose of our platform is to support both things. One of the things that we like to talk about, and we don't think it's addressed enough, is the reproducibility and the repeatability of the study designs. So what does that mean? That means if you're working, for example, in the insurance sector, you really don't know where to start when you start to talk about behavioral and biometric data. So how do you design a study? How many participants do you need to have? What type of data do you need to collect? How do you recruit all of these participants? This is why we have Tacit templates, a proven system that you can see, okay, different participants or even researchers from our industry are using such templates. You can just take them, copy them, and make sure you follow through a research process that has been validated in your industry. These templates vary from of your industry, but also product life cycle. So if you're just launching a new service versus if you're just optimizing a campaign for a existing saturated industry. Regardless of if you're doing, as I said, anything in pharma, fintech, or just marketing, Tacit templates is an easy way to get started without previous knowledge. And now the fintech example. As I said, fintech is a really interesting industry because what's so interesting about it is they're actually using some of the more aggressive budgets when it comes to user acquisition. And user acquisition is really the holy grail of B2C fintech. So the problem that our client had was really how do we test different very early stage concepts before we get into production phase. So before we hire professional photographers, professional videographers, before we do the whole high fidelity thing, how can we test something as little as a sketch or a voice note of our marketing director? And really the point here is we use such research briefs to test as early as possible. So the way that it works is that you literally have, and we've done numerous studies of this type, as little as a WhatsApp note where you just describe your concept in 60 to 30 seconds saying, we want this character, the character enters in the room, say such and such, all the way up to really quick mock-ups that are done in days' time. And then what we do is that we immediately test them on a given market. And in the example of Klarna, which is the case study that we're addressing here, it's really to support the incredibly intense growth loop that fintechs need to do and they need to ensure. So really the point is, the moment when we want to decide, okay, this is the direction that we want to go, we launch a campaign immediately to get the feedback from the market. Is this even worth developing, or is this even worth producing? This is heavily connected to the UX of the app and to the entire consumer experience. So what they really want to do is keep all of these things in parallel and have a really fast feedback. So I'll be showing you quite an edgy campaign, which is old enough so we can discuss it, and you all probably seen it. But you can see why was it so interesting and how did the entire early stage creative testing go. First, the methodology and design. We tend to do these types of studies in 72 hours. The classical design that we would have, here you can see, so the classical design that we would have was 3 days. So in this case, 1 weekday, 2 weekends, something that was quite important for the client and the fintech. The second thing is we would like to have at least 3 repetitions to avoid any general mood biases, to avoid any priming effects, and also just to make sure that we have enough repetitions, which we'll show later on in the methodology why. After that, all of the tests are done at respondents' homes, so we don't want to disturb our respondent. Our entire philosophy is to ask as little as possible and to observe and listen as much as possible. So everything is done at respondents' homes, and here you can see the data collected is speech sentiment analysis, eye tracking, facial coding, response time, upper body movement, hand and head movement. We also have some final recap questions. The reason why we do this is because one of the more interesting metrics for our clients is explicit versus implicit. So not only what did they said they felt, but actually what is the delta between what they said they felt and what they actually felt. And then we can dig deeper into that delta. How does the data collection look like in practice? In this case, you see an example of, let's say, 100 UK-based respondents, which is the typical sample size we would use for an early stage creative concept like this. As I said, the entire process is 72 hours, so the first thing that we do, which is very important, is baselining questions. Baselining questions are emotionally neutral questions where we get to know the subject and what their true self is like. So how fast do they respond to questions? What are their normal reactions? Because what happiness is to me might not be the happiness for you. So here's where we do the behavioral and biometric profiling. And we ask questions like, what day is it today? What's your name? And which city are you in? So really questions that don't have any emotional tension around it. After that, we're testing the stimuli, and as I said, we have at least 2, but ideally 3 repetitions, so that we would avoid any general mood biases and any priming effects. All of the stimuli would be shown in a randomized and balanced order, especially if we're testing different formats of the creative concepts, and in this case we are. And then at the end, we have follow-up questions, so as I said, to get to know what is the difference between explicit and implicit, what you said you felt and what you actually felt, and the client sees the data in real time in the dashboard as the progress goes along. Now, to show you an example of insights that we did for this particular study. So in this particular study for the Smooth campaign, some of the insights is that we were immediately able to pin down what is a winning concept. There were numerous early stage creative concepts that we tested throughout the period, but this one in particular really struck. And the reason why we know what was so interesting is that we can really dig deep and show what was the actual screen and the actual millisecond when the emotion was evoked. And then through in-time questions, we could really try to explain what was happening behind it. For example, in the second column, you can see kind of the, as we call them, groomed dogs dining in a kind of very fine ambience, such as this venue. The cognitive dissonance that these types of images spark, especially in this demographic group, was just the thing that Klarna was going after. Also, we can literally say what were the characters and narratives. We heard earlier from Colgate of how important our narratives, and our research tells the same. So although screens and characters are important, the narrative around them is much more important. So we can literally pinpoint and say, this goes into high production, this is just not worth producing. And how did the output look like? In this case, a winning concept, for example, Get Smooth version 15. You can see in the dashboard on our single metric, which we call Tacit, which goes from 1 to 100, 100 being best, 1 being worst, just how strong and positive emotions were evoked. And we literally see what are, in this case, between version 8 and version 15, what was the winning concept, what was the duration of different sessions, but also what were the peaks and the lows, so that we can know exactly what needs improvement, but also what's good enough to go into later stages of production. We then compare all of the previous early stage creatives just to see, okay, this is good, this sounds good, but is it good compared to our previous campaigns? How well does it benchmark against what we did earlier? Again, against very early stage creative concepts. And then we measure how do they stack against them. And then we also do side-by-side comparisons. So how do different campaigns ebb and flow? How do these narratives develop? How do consumers and respondents react? For example, they react really well to Instagram ads, but how do they react to YouTube ads after they've seen the Instagram? Does it tell a story? Does it make the narrative complete? And what our clients like to zoom in most is really to have the best and the worst, and then to make decisions based on what was the peak of this campaign and how do we build a narrative around that? What was the worst part of this campaign and how do we eliminate it as early as possible before our marketing agency goes to the next step? And the full journey, we had to blur some images, but essentially the full journey includes everything from static images, audio files, even different very early stage print ads, really anything that you can imagine, but on a very, very early and high level. Now, what also interesting is the anatomy of best and worst moments. So we all know, for example, in a given campaign, this is for the Smooth campaign, where we have the Jello cake. The best element by far was the moment where the person on the screen interacted with the Jello piece of cake. Now, what was interesting is not only what was the winning screen and what was the winning moment in this early stage creative, but also where were they looking at, and then what were the emotional reactions evoked. And here we show to our clients not only what is the Tacit score, but also what is the arousal and valence. Arousal being how strong or weak an emotion is, and valence being how positive or negative it is. What was the actual arousal and valence evoked by a given screen, and how can they optimize based on that? So what? Next steps. Essentially, the point of next steps is to interpret everything we found out from this early stage creative testing and to let them know these are the characters that we move forward with, these are the melodies, the copy that we move forward with, this is what seems right, but isn't developed enough. Maybe you can have another think, maybe we can do another round. Not essentially worth throwing away, but not worth moving in the next step. And also, what are some of the potential threats and opportunities that a client like Klarna in a space like fintech that they can implement based on their growth loop. And then in the end, the conclusion is really to answer on the questions that our clients ask, which is, what were the emotional reactions evoked by this campaign? Is it on brand? Does it make sense to move forward? And then if we compare and take that into account with what we tested for the UX and CX of the actual mobile app, does it make sense? So does this campaign resonate with the customer? And now just to show you a couple of additional slides that we didn't have time to go through. One of the things about this topic, which we address continuously with our clients, is how complex, yet interesting, the entire area of biometric and behavioral insights is. So one of the things that we've done during the COVID years is we prepared a course which is accredited and taught across several universities in Europe. And it's essentially a self-paced Google Classroom course if you want to get started with a behavioral and biometric, but you don't know where to start. We also have different case studies and insights that we can share, but because they vary from FMCG, pharma, fintech, and banking, if you want to receive them, I would kindly invite you to scan this code. It's only 3 questions so that we know what actual case study we can send to you. And now I think we have a couple of minutes for some Q&A.
We do indeed have time for a question or two.
Thank you. The material you showed in your presentation, it looked pretty finished. Yeah. You spoke about opportunities in a very early stage. That's for me a little bit a contradiction, but you might be able to solve that conflict.
Absolutely. So in the dashboard you see some of the final materials, but when I say early stage creative concepts, it's literally WhatsApp audio notes and drawings. We don't have them because this is one of the reasons why it's a bit tricky for us to share some of the case studies. Some of the clients still don't allow us to share the early stage creative concepts. It's a bunch of NDAs and a bunch of really legality around it, but we had to use materials that were publicly available in order to show the case study because we're not allowed to share the internal documents. But there were, some of them were kind of mood boards, and we have some case studies that literally include mood boards, which we can share for the tourism and hospitality industry. But for this case, for most of the marketing campaigns, it's really as early as like drawings. But unfortunately, when we do a case study, we have to use the finished material unless the client gives us explicit consent to share the drawing. So thank you for the question.
We do have time for one quick question. I will run wherever you need me to run. Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Jessica.